There is a door in the lower Queen's wing that no one had opened in 11 winters, and for the last 3 of those winters, it was my duty to stand outside it and make certain no one did. They called it the dead post. Every guardsman in Harrogate had done a turn there at least once, standing his hours in a corridor that led nowhere, before a door sealed with the late Queen's own signet pressed into a disk of black wax the size of a man's palm. The wax had gone brittle and gray at the edges. The iron of the lock had wept a long rust stain down the oak like a tear that had dried before it fell. Behind that door was a room the palace had agreed to forget, and my orders were 3 plain lines. Admit no one, break no seal, report anything. For 3 years I reported nothing, because for 3 years nothing happened. Then, on a night in the tail of a wet autumn, with the corridor lamps guttering low and the whole wing asleep, I heard the wax crack. I want to be precise about this, because everything that followed hangs on it. I did not imagine a sound. I had listened to that corridor breathe for 1,000 nights. I knew its every settle and drip. What I heard was the small, particular snap of old wax parting from wood, and then the careful scrape of a pick working the wards of a lock that had not turned since the Queen was carried out feet first. I came round the corner with my lamp up and my other hand on my rifle, and a man froze at the door with a bent iron in his fingers, and a lantern shuddered to a slit at his feet. "Step back from the door," I said. He straightened slowly. I knew him. Everyone in the household knew him, Rennick, the Queen Consort's own factor, a smooth, gray man who kept Lady Morwenna's accounts and carried her wishes into rooms she did not care to enter herself. He had the sort of face that arranged itself into whatever the moment required, and just then it arranged itself into mild, injured surprise, as though I were the one caught somewhere I should not be. "Guardsman," he said, "you gave me a fright." "You are at a sealed door with a pick in your hand," I said. "Step back." "There is no need for that tone." He let the iron drop into his coat, unhurried, and nudged the shuttered lantern behind his heel. "Her Majesty the Queen Consort has ordered an inventory of the lower wing. The room is damp. Things are rotting behind that oak that ought to have been dealt with years ago. I came to look at the lock so the joiners might know what to bring." "The seal is the late Queen's," I said. "It comes off by the King's warrant, or it does not come off, not by a factor with a pick at the 2nd hour of the morning." For just a breath, the mildness slipped, and I saw something underneath it, not anger but calculation, the quick flat look of a man deciding how much I was worth and how much I could cost him. Then the pleasant mask came back down. "You're new to the post," he said, though he knew I was not. "There's a great deal here you don't understand, and no reason you should. Go back to your corner, and I'll forget you drew a weapon on the Queen Consort's own man. That would go badly for you, you know, very badly." "Report anything," I said. "Those are my orders, I'll report this." He looked at me a moment longer. Then he collected his lantern, brushed a fleck of wax from his sleeve as if it were the only thing that offended him, and walked away down the sleeping corridor without hurry, the way a man walks when he means you to understand that he is not afraid of you, and that you should perhaps be a little afraid of him. I stood the rest of my watch with my back to that door and my eyes on the dark, and I did not sleep for what remained of the night. I have gone back to that moment many times since the crack of the wax, the bent iron, the gray face rearranging itself. I have wondered what would have become of the Queen who lay beyond that door, and of her name, and of a good many other things, if I had come round the corner 3 minutes later. Sometimes the whole weight of a life turns on a man being where he was told to be, at the hour he was told to be there. That is the entire trade of a guardsman, if you strip it down. We are paid to be present. Let me tell you who lay beyond the door, since her name is the reason any of this is worth setting down. Queen Isolde had been dead 11 years by that autumn. She had been the first wife of King Alaric and the mother of his heir, Crown Prince Rowan, and of the Princess Ilara, and by the time I came to Harrogate as a raw recruit, she was already a grave in the royal crypt and a cold word in the mouths of people who had never met her. The court had a settled opinion of the late queen, and it was not kind. They said she had been proud. They said she had been distant, that in her last years she had withdrawn from her people, stopped her progresses, given up her charities, shut herself in her wing with her ledgers and her locked boxes, and let the realm think what it liked. Worst of all, they said she had been close-fisted to the point of shame, that she had let the crown's own treasury run thin under her stewardship, that a queen who wore a fortune at her throat had turned her face from a starving realm in the worst years anyone living could remember, and had died leaving the accounts a ruin for better hands to mend. The miser queen, the cold queen, I heard those names in the barracks before I ever stood the dead post. Old servants said them with a curl of the lip. Younger ones said them the way you repeat anything you have been told often enough as simple fact, needing no proof because everyone knew it. And in the years since, another queen had made that coldness shine all the brighter by standing next to it. King Alaric had married again, some years after Isolde's death, a younger woman of a powerful house, the Lady Morwenna, and made her his Queen Consort. Where Isolde was remembered as ice, Morwenna was famed as warmth. She opened hospitals and stood godmother to foundlings and wept, beautifully and publicly, at the right gravesides. She had brought her own children into the household, the Lord Cassius, a broad, handsome, careless young man, and the Lady Verena, and she managed the great machinery of the palace with a soft hand and a hard grip, and she was loved. The realm compared the two queens the way people always do, and Isolde came off the worse in every telling, the cold dead one, and the warm living one who had come to thaw the house. I had believed it too, why would I not? I was a boy from a fen village 100 miles from any palace, and I knew nothing of queens except what I was told. If you had asked me that autumn what I thought of Queen Isolde, I would have shrugged and said what everyone said. She was cold. She was proud. She let her people go hungry. I did not yet know that I was alive because of her. The morning after I found Rennick at the door, I made my report to my sergeant, and through him it was meant to go up to the captain of the guard, and it did, and for a few days I thought that was the end of my part in it. A factor had been caught somewhere he should not be. The matter would be dealt with by men above me. A guardsman does his hours and holds his tongue. Then the warrant came, and I understood that the door had been going to open one way or another, and that my report had only decided how. Came down in the king's name, though I would learn later whose hand had guided the king's to the pen. The lower queen's wing was to be cleared. It was damp, the warrant said. It was unsound. It had been left too long, and with the crown Prince Rowan soon to take up a greater share of his father's burdens, the household was to be set in order, the old dead rooms emptied, catalogued, and their contents dispersed as the household saw fit. The sealed muniment room, the room behind my door, was named directly. Its seal was to be broken under proper warrant, its contents removed, inventoried, and disposed of. Disposed of. I read the copy pinned in the guardroom 3 times, and that phrase sat wrong in my chest each time. A muniment room is where a great house keeps its records, its charters and deeds and account books, the paper skeleton that proves who owns what and who did what and who a family is. You do not casually dispose of such a room. And a queen does not seal her private records with her own signet, on her own dying command, and lay a curse of 11 years' silence on the door, unless there is something inside she means either to protect or to hide. The court assumed she meant to hide it. The cold queen's shameful accounts, they said, the proof of her miserly mismanagement, the ruin she had left. Best to burn it quietly and let the poor woman keep what little dignity the grave allowed. That was the kind reading, and the woman pressing hardest for the room to be emptied and its contents dispersed was the same warm, beloved Queen Consort whose factor I had caught with a pick at the lock 2 nights before she had any warrant at all. I was young, but I was not a fool. A person who has a warrant coming does not send a man to pick the lock in the dark first. You only do that when there is something inside you need to reach before other eyes do, something you must take out or destroy before the room is opened honestly in front of witnesses. I asked myself the question I have asked at every crossroads since. What is my duty here? Not what is safe, not what is easy. My orders had been 3 lines: admit no one, break no seal, report anything, and the whole spirit of them was that this door was not to be trifled with. A warrant would open it lawfully. Very well. But the same warrant that opened it lawfully also handed everything inside to the household, which is to say, to Morwenna's people, to inventory and disperse as they pleased, with no honest witness who owed the dead queen anything. So I did the one thing a guardsman in my place could do. I went to my sergeant, and then, when he shrugged, to the captain of the guard himself, and I asked, respectfully, correctly, a young man asking a favor he had no right to expect, that, when the seal on the muniment room was broken, I be the man on the post. I had held the dead door 3 years, I said. I knew the room's approaches. If the Queen Consort's factor had already been caught at the lock once, then the opening ought to be watched by someone who had no interest in what came out of it but the crowns. The captain was an old soldier named Draven, gray as the wax on the door, with eyes that had watched 3 monarchs and trusted none of them past the length of his own arm. He heard me out without a word. When I finished, he looked at me for a long moment. "You caught Rennick at the lock," he said. "It was not a question." "Yes, sir." "And you think the Queen Consort wants that room emptied for a reason that won't bear looking at?" I hesitated. It is one thing to think a thing, and another to say it aloud to your captain about the second most powerful person in the realm. "I think, sir," I said carefully, "that a sealed room should be opened in front of honest witnesses, and everything in it written down before a single crate leaves, and no man's word taken for what was or wasn't there. That's all. Whatever's inside, that's the correct way." Draven's mouth moved in something that was not quite a smile. "That is the correct way," he agreed. "It is also in this house a very good way to make an enemy who will end you." He turned back to the papers on his table. "You'll have the post. Say nothing to anyone about why you asked for it. And guardsmen," I stopped at the door, "write down everything, whatever comes out of that room, every crate, every box, every scrap. If you can read, read it. A record no one expected you to keep is the only shield your sort and mine ever have in a place like this. Now go." I went, and 2 days later, at the gray hour after dawn, they broke the seal on the late Queen Isolde's muniment room, and I stood at the door I had guarded for 3 years and watched it swing inward for the first time, and everything I thought I knew about the cold queen began, very slowly, to come apart in my hands. The seal came off with a formality that surprised me. A clerk of the household read the warrant aloud to the empty corridor. A joiner slid a chisel under the disk of black wax and lifted it whole, unbroken, into a cloth as if it were a holy thing. The great lock was oiled and worked until at last the wards gave, and the door groaned in on hinges stiff with 11 years of neglect. Behind it, cold air came out at us, dry cold, cellar cold, and under it the smell of old paper and leather and dust, which is the smell of every place where a family keeps its memory. There was no treasure inside. I think Rennick, standing at my shoulder with his ledger and his 3 porters, had expected me to gawp at gold. But the muniment room of a queen is not a jewel vault. It was a long, low chamber, stone-walled, its single window bricked up, lined floor to ceiling on both sides with wooden shelving. On the shelves stood ranks of ledgers in oxblood and green leather, boxes tied with faded ribbon, bundles of letters, rolled charters heavy with wax pendants. At the far end, under a linen sheet gone the color of weak tea, stood a lady's writing desk. And beside the desk, squatting on the flags like something that had grown there, an iron chest the size of a hound's kennel, banded and double-locked, with the late queen's crest worked into the lid. "Right," said Rennick briskly, rubbing his hands. "We'll start with that. He nodded his porters at the iron chest. "Get it up and out to the yard cart. The desk next, then work the shelves back to front. Quick as you like. Her ladyship wants the wing clear by week's end." "Nothing leaves this room unlogged," I said. He turned. The three porters stopped where they were, looking between us. "I have the ledger," Rennick said, and lifted it. "I shall log it in the yard at the cart. It's a great deal more comfortable there than in this tomb." "You'll log it here," I said, "at the shelf, each piece before it moves, and I'll countersign each page." I kept my voice level and correct, the voice of a man citing a rule rather than picking a fight. "A sealed royal muniment is opened and inventoried in place, under the eye of the guard, and nothing crosses the threshold until it's been written and witnessed. That's the standing order for any crown seal factor. You know it better than I do. If you'd rather, we can send to Captain Draven and ask him to confirm it, and hold the whole business until he does." I watched him weigh whether to make a fight of it in front of his own porters and decide against it. Sending to Draven meant delay, and worse, it meant drawing the captain's eye to exactly this room at exactly this hour. Whatever Rennick had come to fetch, he did not want it fetched under Draven's lamp. "As you please," he said, and the pleasantness had gone thin as paper over the thing beneath it. "Piece by piece. It will take a week of your life, guardsman, and I hope you think it well spent." So it began, and it was slow, and it was the making of everything. We worked the shelves the way I had insisted. Each ledger lifted down, its title read aloud, entered in the household book and again in the small record Draven had told me to keep in my own hand, then set in a crate. I made them go by the shelf's own order so that nothing could be quietly skipped. And because I had said I could read, and because Rennick could hardly forbid the guard from reading what the guard was witnessing, I read. Titles at first, then, when the factor stepped out to see his cart or take his ease, whole pages. They were accounts. Household accounts, estate accounts, the private purse of a queen, what came in from her estates and dower lands, what went out on wages and cloth and candles and alms. Dull as ditchwater, most of it, the ordinary bookkeeping of a great life. I logged 3 shelves the first day and learned nothing, but that Queen Isolde had kept a very exact house and had a clerk with a beautiful, upright hand. It was on the second day that I found the first thing that did not fit. Rennick had gone up to the yard with a load, leaving me and 1 board porter and a room full of the Queen's paper. I had reached the ledgers of her private purse for the years. I remember the dates leaping off the page at me of the long dearth. Every soul in the realm above a certain age knew the long dearth, though most had their own name for it. The hungry years, the white winters. 3 seasons running when the harvests failed one after another, when the rivers froze, and the seed rotted in the cold ground, and bread went to a price that a laboring family could not dream of paying. I had been a child in a fen village called Renfield through those years, and I did not remember much of them, being small, but I remembered the church bell going for the dead, and I remembered being hungry in a bone-deep way I have never quite forgotten, and I remembered, though I did not understand it then, the winter it stopped, the winter the carts came. I turned to those years in Queen Isolde's private ledger, expecting more candles and cloth. What I found was money going out of her purse in amounts that made me stop and put my finger on the page to be sure I had read the columns right. Vast sums, thousands upon thousands, quarter after quarter, drawn out of the Queen's private fortune through the 3 years of the dearth, sums that dwarfed anything else in the book, sums that must have swallowed her whole income and then begun to eat the capital behind it. And against each entry in that same upright clerk's hand, only a name I did not know. Not a merchant, not a wage, not a work of building. Just over and over the same 3 words in the margin, paid the gray almoner. I stood there with the ledger open, and a cold that had nothing to do with the cellar going up my back. Because I saw all at once how this looked, how it was meant to look perhaps to whoever came to burn it. Here was the proof the court had always wanted. The cold queen had indeed drained her fortune and with it strained the crown, in the very years the realm starved. Money pouring out by the thousand to some gray almoner while her people ate frozen turnips. It was worse than miserliness. It looked like theft, or madness, or both, a queen emptying the coffers into her own shadowy hands while the country died. If this was what Isolde had sealed, no wonder she had wanted it locked away. No wonder Morwenna wanted it burned. Even her enemies would grant her the mercy of hiding a thing so damning. That was my first thought, and I am not proud of how readily I thought it. 11 years of the cold queen had done their work in me, same as everyone. I looked at a queen giving away a fortune, and my mind went straight to greed and shame, because that was the only story I had ever been given for her. Then the board porter, glad of any voice, said the thing that turned it all over. "Gray Almoner," he said, craning at the page. "My gran used to talk of him. Where she was raised up north, she said one winter in the bad years, when they'd nothing left, carts came in the night with grain and coal and never a name on them, and the priest said it was sent by the Gray Almoner and they should pray for him and ask no more. She swore by it till she died. Reckoned it kept half the village alive." He shrugged, embarrassed at having said so much. "Old folks' tale, likely." I looked at the ledger. I looked at the words, "Paid the Gray Almoner in a dead queen's private accounts," against a river of her own money flowing out in the worst winters in living memory. And the story turned inside out in my hands, so fast it left me dizzy. The money was not being taken, it was being given. I did not sleep much that night either. I lay in my cot in the guards' quarters with the porter's words going round in my skull, carts in the night, never a name on them, and beside them the church bell of Renfield, and the winter the carts came to us too. I had been perhaps 6 years old. I remembered the whole village turned out in the dark, and grain sacks handed down off a wagon by men who would not give their names, and my mother weeping over a loaf as though it were the child she had feared to lose. A friend of the realm, the priest, had told us and bade us pray for a soul who wished to stay hidden. I had eaten that bread. I was here, grown, in a red tunic, 100 miles from that fen because that bread had come. I had assumed all my life it had come from God, or luck, or the king. It had not occurred to my mother, or the priest, or anyone in Renfield that it might have a face, still less that the face belonged to the very queen the whole realm was learning to despise. But a single word in a margin proves nothing, and I was Draven's man and had been told to write down everything and take no one's word, not even a dead queen's. A ledger can be dressed. Money marked paid to a charity can as easily have gone into a pocket, and the Gray Almoner made a fine mask for a thief. If I was going to overturn 11 years of what everyone knew, I needed more than a tale about a porter's grandmother. I needed to see where the money went. So over the next days, while Rennick fretted and hurried his carts and I logged the shelves at my own careful pace, I hunted. Not the private ledger only now, the whole room. An immuniment room, I was learning, is a thing built to answer questions, if you have the patience to ask them in the right order. Behind the ordinary account books on a lower shelf I had not yet reached, I found the other half of the story. A second set of ledgers in the same clerk's hand, kept separately and marked with a small gray seal I did not recognize, and these were not the Queen's household at all. These were relief accounts. Grain bought by the shipload and the wagon load, coal, salt fish, blankets, seed corn to plant against the next year. Bought through factors and merchants I did not know, under that same gray seal and scent. And here my hands were not quite steady as I turned the leaves, sent out to the realm by district and by parish. Each consignment entered against the place it went, and the number of souls it was meant to feed. I read them the way a starving man eats, too fast then more slowly savoring, northern parishes, the fen country, the high moors where the frost bit worst, hundreds of entries, thousands of tons, and then on a leaf for the third and worst winter of the dearth, under the heading of the fen deaneries, a line that stopped my heart in my chest as surely as if a hand had closed on it. Renfield and its hamlets, grain, coal, seed corn, for the relief of 240 souls. 240 souls. I did not know the number of my own village as a boy, but it cannot have been much more than that. She had counted us. Some clerk under her gray seal had written down the number of us and set against it enough bread to see us through, and no one in Renfield had ever known the hand that fed them. My mother had wept over that loaf and prayed for a stranger, and the stranger was the cold queen, the miser queen, the proud dead woman whose name I had shrugged at not a fortnight before. I sat down on an upturned crate in that cold stone room, and I will admit it, I wept a little myself, quietly, so the porter should not see. Then I wiped my face and did what Draven had taught me. I wrote it down. There was more, and each piece I turned up made the shape of it clearer and more astonishing. Where had the money come from? Her private purse could not have borne it alone. I had seen it run dry in the ledger, seen the capital eaten to the bone. The answer was in a slim book bound in black, tucked inside the writing desk under the linen sheet, and it was the most private thing in the room. It was a record, in the Queen's own hand this time, not her clerk's. I would come to know that hand well, of what she had sold. Her jewels, her plate, the greater part of a queen's personal fortune, turned quietly into money over 3 years through discreet men in 3 cities, and every coin of it poured into the gray accounts and out again as bread. And here was the thing that made me set the book down and press my hand flat over my mouth. Against the greatest of the jewels, the Eldermore collar, a rope of stones that every portrait of a queen of this house had worn for 200 years, she had written a single line. Copies made in paste to keep the appearance that the king be spared and no question raised. Paste. She had sold the real collar to feed the fens, and worn a string of colored glass to her own throne so that no one would know her fortune was gone. The great cold jewels the court sneered that she hoarded so tightly. She had turned every true stone into grain and worn the fakes to her grave rather than let anyone see what she had done. Rather than let anyone see. That was the riddle at the middle of it, and it gnawed at me even through my wonder. Why hide it? A queen who beggared herself to feed a starving realm is the stuff of legend. She might have been the most beloved woman in the history of the house. Instead, she had built an elaborate machine, a gray seal, a false name, glass jewels, sealed books, for the sole purpose of doing the greatest good she could while ensuring that no living soul would ever thank her for it. She had chosen to be remembered as cold. She had, as far as I could tell, worked as hard to hide her charity as most people work to hide a crime. I did not understand it yet. I only knew, by the 4th day in that room, that everything the realm believed about Queen Isolde was not merely wrong but the exact inverse of the truth. That the cold queen had a warmer heart than any monarch in the realm's memory, and had spent it entirely in secret, and let the world spit on her name as the price. And I knew one thing more, which frightened me, that the Queen Consort's factor had come with a pick in the dark to reach this room before honest eyes did, and that disperse the contents as the household sees fit, was a very short way of writing, burn all of this before anyone reads it. Whoever wanted Isolde remembered as cold wanted these ledgers gone. I was, without having meant to be, the only thing standing between the truth and the fire. I needed help, and I needed it from someone who owed the living queen nothing. The clerk's hand had been nagging at me, that upright, beautiful script filling ledger after ledger, year on year. Such a hand belongs to a real man, and a man who wrote the queen's most secret accounts through the whole of the dearth had either died with her secret or was still alive somewhere with it locked in him. I asked, quietly, among the old servants, who had been the late queen's muniment clerk. An ancient laundress remembered. Master Bettany, she said. A little dry stick of a man, the queen's own clerk of accounts, who had gone away into the almshouses by the river when his mistress died and had not been seen at court since. She thought he might yet be living. He would be very old. He was living. I found him on my next day off duty, in a whitewashed almshouse cell that smelled of tallow and dried lavender. A tiny bird-boned man near 90 with hands knotted like old roots and eyes that were still, behind their cloudiness, sharp as a clerk's eyes ever are. He was sitting very upright by his little window with a book on his knee. He was too blind to read. And when I gave my name and my post, he went so still that I thought I had frightened him to death. "They have opened the room," he said. It was not a question. His voice was a dry whisper but steady. "Yes," I said, 2 days past, under warrant. They mean to clear it and burn what's inside. Master Bettany, I have read the grey ledgers. I have read the black book from the desk. I know what she did in the dearth. I know about the grey almoner and the collar of paste and the 240 souls at Renfield. My voice cracked on the last, and his cloudy eyes came round to me. "I was one of them," I said. "I was a child at Renfield. I ate her bread and never knew. Master Bettany, I have to understand. Why did she hide it? Why let them call her cold? A word from her and the whole realm would have loved her. Why the false name and the glass jewels and 11 years of that door locked shut?" The old man was silent so long I feared he had drifted off, as the very old do. Then he set his blind book aside and folded his ruined hands and told me. "Because she was cleverer than all of them," he said, "and she loved her children more than her own name. Sit, guardsman. You have come a long way to hear it, though you did not know you were coming. Sit, and I will tell you what I swore on her hand I would never tell, and gladly now, because you have told me the one thing I have prayed 11 years to hear, that the room was opened by an honest man. She said it would be. She said at the end, 'Bettany, one day an honest hand will open that door, and then it will not matter that we hid.' I did not believe her. I am old enough now to be ashamed of every time I doubted that woman." He drew a long, thin breath. "Sit down, and I will tell you why the best queen this house ever had chose to be remembered as the worst." I sat on the edge of his cot, and the little clerk gathered 11 years of silence and gave it to me. "You must understand what this realm was in the dearth," he began. "You were a child. You knew hunger but not the shape of the whole. I sat in the Queen's cabinet and I saw the shape of it. The harvests failed and the crown's granaries emptied, and the great houses, the lords who hold the corn and the land, they did not open their barns. They held. They held their grain against a higher price, and they let their own people starve. And the king's council argued month after month about what could be done that would not offend this lord or beggar that one. Politics. While the fen country and the moors buried their dead by the cartload, the men who might have saved them counted their profit and called it prudence." His knotted hands tightened on each other. "The queen went to the king. She begged him to command the barns open, to spend the treasury, to force the lords. And the king, your own King Alaric, though he was younger then, with his beard still dark, he was not a cruel man. He was never cruel, but he was afraid, and his counsel frightened him worse. They told him the great houses would rise if the crown reached into their barns, that a king who seized his lord's corn would have a war on his hands before the thaw, that the throne itself might not survive it. And they were not wholly wrong, guardsmen. That is the bitter truth. Had the crown moved openly against the lords in that winter, there might have been blood and a boy heir, your Prince Rowan. Then a child might have inherited a realm on fire, or inherited nothing at all. The king chose the throne. He chose his son's inheritance over the fens. Men who wear crowns make such choices and call them statecraft, and then they do not sleep." "But the queen," I said. "But the queen," Bettany agreed, and for the first time something like a smile touched his dry mouth, made a different arithmetic. "She could not command the barns. She was only a consort, and the council would have chained her hands. But no law and no council could stop a woman spending her own money as she pleased. Her jewels were hers. Her dower lands were hers. Her private fortune was hers to throw in the sea if she chose. So she chose to throw it to the fens." "Then why hide it?" I burst out. "If it was hers to give, why the false name? Why let them believe?" "Think," said the old man gently, as though teaching a bright but hasty boy his sums. "Think what it would have meant in that winter for the realm to learn that the queen was selling the crown's own famous jewels to feed the poor, while the king's council sat on its hands and the great lords hoarded their corn. What does that do?" I saw it then. It came on me cold and complete, the whole terrible cleverness of her. It shames the king, I said slowly. It shames the council. It holds the lords up as monsters in front of the whole realm. The queen feeding the starving with her own broken fortune, while her husband's government does nothing. It would have been a torch to dry tinder, Bettany finished. The lords, shamed and furious, would have had their revolt after all, not against the king's soldiers, but against a queen who had made them look like villains before the world. They would have turned on her and on her children and on the king for failing to master his own wife. Do you see it? Her charity made public would have become the very weapon her enemies needed. A cause, a banner. It would have split the council, armed the great houses with grievance, and put her son, the heir, square in the path of it. She would have saved the fens and set the realm at war over her own head, and her children would have paid the price for the rest of their lives. Every good she did in the open would have come back as a blade at Prince Rowan's throat. The little room was very quiet. Somewhere down the almshouse a kettle sang. So she gave in secret, I said. She gave in secret, said Bettany, so that the good could be done and the good could not be used. The grey almoner had no face, so no lord could rage at him. The jewels were paste, so no one at court could point and cry that the queen had beggared the crown. The king never knew, she kept it even from him, because a king who knew could be forced to answer for it, and a king who did not know could not. She let the council believe she had merely grown close and strange with grief and aid. She let the court believe she hoarded. She let the realm believe she was cold. She took the whole weight of the lie onto her own name and carried it to her grave, so that 200,000 souls might eat and not one drop of it fall on her son. That, guardsman, is what your cold queen was. She was a woman who fed a nation and paid for it with her own good name, on purpose, with her eyes open, and asked only that the reckoning wait until the danger was past. I found I could not speak for a moment. When I could, I asked the thing that mattered most for what was coming. She sealed the room. She said an honest hand would open it one day. Did she leave anything in her own words that could stand as proof? A ledger can be called a forgery. Her enemies will say the whole room is a lie. The old clerk's cloudy eyes found mine, and there was something fierce in them now. She left a letter, he said, under her own hand and her own great seal, not the gray one, her true signet, the one they melted the wax of over that door. It lies in the iron chest in a compartment beneath the false floor of it, wrapped in oilcloth. She wrote it in her last month, and she made me swear its words. To be opened, it says, by an honest hand when the realm no longer hungers, and read then before the king, that my children may be free of the lie I chose. She meant it to clear her line when the danger had passed. She meant her son to know his mother. He gripped my wrist with a strength I would not have believed. The chest, guardsman. The letter is in the chest. Do not let them take the chest. And that was the word, spoken in a whitewashed almshouse cell, that sent me running back to the palace with my heart in my mouth. Because the iron chest was the one thing in that room Rennick had wanted out and away on his cart from the very first hour, and I had let it stand only by the thinness of a rule. I was too late by half a day, and it was my own fault for taking the day's leave, though I could not have known. I came back to the lower Queen's wing at dusk, to find the corridor loud with porters and the muniment room half-stripped, and Rennick with a warrant in his hand, fresh-inked, over a seal I knew too well now. While I had sat at Bettany's cot, the Queen Consort had gone to the king and had the terms of the clearance changed. There was no longer any need, the new order said, for the guard to witness each piece in place. The work was slow and the wing was wanted. The household would remove the contents to a secure store and complete the inventory there. And the iron chest, the chest was already gone. Carted up to the yard and away, Rennick told me with a smile that no longer bothered to hide anything at all, to the Queen Consort's own strong room, for safekeeping, until it could be opened and its contents assessed. "You've been very diligent, guardsman," he said. "Her Majesty noted it. She feels the burden should be lifted from you. You're relieved of this post, effective tonight. Captain Draven has the order." He let that sit. Whatever you think you found in those old books, and I can see by your face you think you found something, I would counsel you to forget it. Sick old women write strange things in ledgers. The late queen was not well at the end. Everyone knew it. If you go about the palace saying otherwise, repeating the ravings of dead accounts, you'll be the one they call unwell. And unwell guardsmen are pensioned off to fen villages and never heard of again. His smile widened a fraction. You're a fen man yourself, I hear. You'd know the way home. I will not pretend I was not afraid. I was a guardsman of no family and no friends above the rank of sergeant, and I had just been told plainly, by the second most powerful person in the realm, through her smiling factor, that the truth I carried would cost me my post and my liberty and be called madness if I spoke it, and that the one piece of proof that could not be dismissed, the Queen's own letter under her own seal, was now locked in Morwenna's private strong-room, where it would burn in a grate within the week, and no one would ever know it had existed. That night I understood at last and all the way down why Morwenna wanted the room. It was not only the shame of being outshone by a dead woman, though that was in it. Bettany, when I ran back to him, white-faced with the news that the chest was taken, gave me the rest of it, the part that turned Isolde's quiet sacrifice into a living crime. There is more in those gray books than famine bread, he told me, gripping my hand. The Queen did not only feed the dearth. When it was past, she took what was left of her fortune and what her dower land still earned, and she settled it into an endowment, a charity for the children of the poor, and a portion set by for her own grandchildren, sealed to their protection and their honor, to be theirs when they came of age. She named trustees. She meant it to outlive her. And who, guardsman, do you think has held the household purse and the management of that endowment these 11 years, since the king in his grief handed the whole domestic treasury to his warm new wife? I did not need to answer. I saw it whole. She has been eating it, Bettany said softly. The Queen Consort, bleeding Isolde's endowment year on year into her own accounts, into her son Cassius's debts and her daughter's dowry and her own soft life, and covering the hole in the books with the oldest lie at court that the treasury was left thin because the cold queen mismanaged it. Every coin she stole from those orphans and from Isolde's own grandchildren she has blamed on the dead. That is why the room must burn, not for shame, for the reckoning. Those ledgers do not only prove Isolde was good, they prove Morwenna is a thief, and that the Queen Consort has spent 11 years robbing the children she smiles at, behind the name of the woman she let the realm despise. I walked back to the palace through the dark not as a frightened man now, but as a man who has been handed something too heavy to set down. A dead queen had left a letter for an honest hand, and Bettany had decided the hand was mine, and I could not make it not so by wishing. If I let the chest burn, I would spend the rest of my life a fen pensioner who knew the truth and had let it be fed to a fire. That is not a thing a guardsman can carry. But I was one man, relieved of his post, with a factor's threat ringing in my ears and no proof left in my hands, for Rennick had the ledgers now and Morwenna had the chest. What I had was a small record in my own writing, and the memory of what I had read, and a 90-year-old clerk in an almshouse. Against the Queen Consort, that was nothing. I needed weight. I needed an honest hand that was heavier than mine. I went to Captain Draven. I found him in the guardroom past midnight, and I told him everything plainly in order, the way he had taught me to write a report, the pick at the lock, the gray ledgers, the collar of paste, Renfield's 240 souls, Bettany's testimony, the endowment, the theft, the chest carried off to Morwenna's strong-room, and the letter under the Queen's own seal that lay inside it and would not survive the week. Draven listened the way he did everything without a flicker, his gray eyes on my face. When I finished, he was silent a long while. "You know what you're saying," he said at last. "You're saying the Queen Consort is a thief and the king has been a fool for 11 years, and you're saying it with a personal notebook and a dying clerk for your witnesses, against the woman who runs this house. If you're wrong, they'll break you and me for listening. If you're right," he almost smiled, "they'll break you harder unless we're very quick and very correct." "I'm not wrong, sir." "No," he said. "I don't believe you are. I've watched Rennick's carts go out of that wing for a week, and I've watched the Queen Consort's face when the muniment room is spoken of, and a man does not soldier 50 years without learning what fear looks like when it's dressed as impatience." He rose and reached for his coat. "But you and I cannot open her strong room, and we cannot make the king hear us. There is exactly one person in this palace who can command that chest be produced and opened in the king's own presence, and whom neither Morwenna nor her factor nor the whole soft weight of the household can bully or buy. And by good fortune she cannot abide the Queen Consort and never has. Come, we're going to wake the Princess Adela." The Princess Adela was the king's sister, a spare, upright woman of hard 60 who had never married, never softened, and never once in her life pretended to like something she did not. She kept her own household at the far end of the palace and her own opinions about everyone in it, and the court was a little afraid of her, because she could not be flattered and did not want anything they had to offer. She had loved her brother's first wife. She had, it was said, never forgiven the ease with which the court had let Isolde's memory be blackened, though she had held her tongue for the king's sake. If any soul in Harrowgate would hear a guardsman out at 1 in the morning about the honor of the dead queen, it was Adela. She received us in a dressing robe, sitting very straight in a hard chair with a single candle, and she listened to my whole account without one interruption, her eyes never leaving me. When I had done, she sat for a moment turning a heavy old ring on her finger. "Paste," she said finally in a low, dangerous voice. She wore paste to my brother's coronation feast and let those cats at court whisper she was too mean to have her stones reset. I sat 3 seats from her and I thought her cold. She looked up, and there was grief in her hard face, and under it a rising fury. She fed the fens with the Eldermore collar and let me think her cold. "Guardsman, if one word of what you've told me is false, I will have your tongue." And if it is true, she stood, tall and terrible in her plain robe, then by our mother's grave, the Queen Consort has robbed my brother's grandchildren and slandered a better woman than herself for 11 years, and it ends at dawn. Draven. You will say nothing to anyone until I have spoken to the king. I will not have that chest touched, opened, or moved before I stand beside it. Set your own men on the Queen Consort's strong room tonight, the guard, not the household, and let no one in or out on any warrant but mine or the king's own hand. Can you do that?" "With pleasure, your highness," said Draven. "Then do it. And you," she turned to me, and something in her fierce old face gentled by a degree, "you were a child at Renfield. You ate her bread." "Yes, ma'am." "Then you are exactly the honest hand she wrote her letter for, and I do not think that is chance. Go and sleep if you can. You'll not sleep, but go and try. Tomorrow you will stand up before the king and the whole court and say all of this again, to their faces, and you will not flinch, because a queen who did not flinch from an entire realm's contempt is depending on you not to. Do you understand me?" "Yes, ma'am," I said, and my voice did not shake, though I am not sure how. The reckoning came the next forenoon, in the long audience hall, and I have stood a great many posts in my life, but none that cost me what it cost to stand in the middle of that floor. Adela had moved fast and moved right. She had gone to her brother before breakfast. What passed between them alone I never learned, but King Alaric came into the hall gray-faced and rigid, an old man holding himself together by main force, and he had commanded the court to attend and the iron chest to be brought. It stood now on a table before the dais, still locked, with 2 of Draven's guardsmen either side of it and Draven himself at its head. Rennick had been made to bring the gray ledgers and the black book back from the store, and they lay stacked beside the chest. And the Queen Consort Morwenna sat at the king's right hand in cloth of silver, composed and lovely, and only very slightly too still, with her son Lord Cassius scowling behind her chair and her factor gray and silent by the wall. The Crown Prince Rowan was there, Isolde's son, a serious man in his prime who had worn his mother's ill fame all his life like a stone in his shoe, and beside him the Princess Alara, and brought in at Adela's insistence and set on a bench to the side, the 3 children of the royal household: Torin, who was 11 and trying to look soldierly; Malin, who was 9, and little Bram at 6, swinging his legs, too young to know he was watching his own grandmother's honor wade. Adela had wanted them there. Let them hear who they come from, she had told the king. Whatever the truth proves to be, let the children hear it from the room and not from the gossips. The king's chamberlain read the warrant. Then Adela, standing at her brother's left, said in her flat, hard voice, "Before this chest is opened, the king will hear the man who caused it to be opened honestly. Guardsmen, stand forward." I stood forward. I will not set down every word I said, for it was only what I have already told you: the pick in the dark, the ledgers, the grey almoner, the fens, the collar of paste, the endowment, and the 240 souls of Renfield, of whom I named myself as one. I spoke it plainly, and I did not look at the Queen Consort while I spoke it, because Adela had told me not to. I looked at the king. He aged 10 years while I talked. When I came to the paste jewels, his hand closed white on the arm of his chair. When I said that his first wife had let herself be called cold, and mean so that no lord could turn her charity into a war against his throne and his son, a sound came out of him that I have never forgotten, low and broken, the sound of a man who has been handed back something he threw away, and told what it was worth. Morwenna did not wait for me to reach the endowment. She was too clever for that. She moved to cut it off. "This is a cruel entertainment," she said, and her voice was warm and sorrowful and pitched to carry. "A guardsman, a fen boy by his own account, and I do not doubt half-fevered with the wish to make his own village a part of some great tale, has read a sick old woman's muddled accounts and spun them into a romance. My lord, the late queen was not well at the end. All the court knew it. Her books are the confusion of a failing mind, and this ambush dishonors her far more than it honors her. Let the poor woman's papers be quietly laid to rest, as she herself wished when she sealed that door, and let us not put a dead queen's weakness on public trial at the word of a servant who wants a story to tell." She turned her lovely, grieving face to the king. "I have only ever wished to spare her memory, my love. That is all the clearing of that wing was ever meant to do. Spare her, spare us all." It was very good. I saw it land on the softer faces along the hall. And I had no answer to it, because everything I held could be called the raving of the sick or the invention of the ambitious. Everything except the one thing locked in the chest, which I had never seen, which I knew of only from a blind old man's word, and which might not be there at all. The whole thing hung, in that moment, on a letter I had to take on faith. "Then let us open the chest," said Princess Adela, "and lay the question to rest with the queen's own hand. Unless," she added, very softly, turning her hard eyes full on Morwenna, "the Queen Consort would rather it were not opened at all." It was a trap laid in a single sentence, and everyone in the hall felt it close. To object now, to argue that the chest should be spared, laid to rest, spirited away, was to say aloud that she feared what was in it. Morwenna was far too clever to walk into that. She spread her hands and smiled her sorrowful smile and said, "Open it, by all means. I have nothing to fear from a poor dead woman's box. I only grieve that we make a spectacle of her." But I was watching her hands, as I had been taught to watch hands, and I saw the knuckles whiten in her lap even as her face stayed soft. The chest had 2 locks and no keys. The keys had died with the queen. Draven had brought a smith, and the smith worked the locks one after the other with picks and a small drill while the whole court stood silent, and the only sounds in that great hall were the scrape of steel and old iron, and once little Bram asking in a whisper what the man was doing, and Malin hushing him. The lid came up. The king leaned forward in his chair. Inside, at the top, lay exactly the sort of thing Morwenna would have wanted found and no more. Bundles of old correspondence tied in ribbon, a queen's small keepsakes, a child's first shoe wrapped in silk that must once have been Rowan's, a pressed flower gone to brown lace. Rennick, by the wall, let out a slow breath. If that had been all, the day was hers. sentimental clutter atop muddled ledgers, easily dismissed as the leavings of a sad and failing woman. But Bettany had told me of the false floor, and I had told Adela, and Adela did not let the smith stop at the keepsakes. "There is a compartment beneath," she said. "The Queen's own clerk swears to it, and he swears to what lies in it. Lift the floor of the chest." They lifted it. Under a thin board fitted so close that you would never have found the seam without knowing it was there, in a bed of raw wool, wrapped in oilcloth stiff with the years, lay a flat packet sealed with a great disk of wax, and I heard Adela's breath go in sharply, because she of all of them knew that seal on sight. It was the late Queen's true signet, the swan and the tower of her own arms, the very device whose print had held the muniment door shut for 11 winters. There is no counterfeiting a dead woman's personal seal that has lain locked away since the day she died. Every soul in that hall who understood what a signet meant understood, in the instant they saw it, that whatever this packet said, it said in Queen Isolde's own true hand and by her own authority, past the reach of any factor's forgery, past any sneer that it was a servant's invention or a sick woman's muddle. The king put out his hand for it, then he drew back as though he did not trust himself to touch it. "Read it," he said, and his voice had gone to gravel. "Adela, read it aloud. Let it be heard by every soul in this house that ever let itself despise her, every soul, beginning with me." Adela broke the seal. It cracked with that same small, dry snap I had heard in the black corridor at the 2nd hour of the morning, the sound that had started all of this. And she unfolded the stiff leaves, and she read the last testament of Queen Isolde to a hall that did not dare to breathe. I will not set down the whole of it. It was long, and much of it was the plain reckoning of a plain conscience, sums and names and dates. But I have carried the heart of it in me ever since, and I will give you that. She wrote that she had done what the ledgers showed, and she named the sums, and named the gray almoner as her own invention and no man's but hers. She wrote why near enough word for word what Bettany had given me in his almshouse cell, that she could not command the barns or the treasury, being only a wife and a consort, but that her own fortune was hers to spend as she pleased, and that she had spent it, all of it gladly, on the bread of the starving. And she wrote that she had hidden it not out of shame but out of love, because a queen seen to shame her husband and his lords in the teeth of a famine would have handed her enemies a war, and her son the heir would have been the first blood spilled in it. "I chose," she wrote, "that my name should be the price of it, and not my child's inheritance. Let them call me cold. A cold name is a small coin to pay for a fed country and a safe son, and I would pay it 1,000 times." She wrote of the endowment, the trust she had raised out of the wreck of her fortune once the dearth was broken, for the children of the poor, and for the protection and honor of her own descendants. And she named its trustees, and she named the sum it had held at her death, to the last coin. And then she wrote the lines that I watched go into Morwenna like a blade slid slow between the ribs, though the queen had been dead 11 years before there was any way for her to know who would be sitting at the king's right hand to hear them. If, when this is read, that endowment is found wanting, if the portion I set by for the children of this house and the children of the realm has been let fall, or spent, or hidden behind the tail of my coldness, then look to the hand that has held the household purse in my stead, and know that whoever blamed the empty coffers upon the dead did so to cover a living theft. I have left this account exact, that my grandchildren may claim what is theirs, and that none may starve the poor twice over in my name. Adela lowered the pages into a silence, so deep I could hear the candles guttering along the walls. Then she spoke, and her flat, hard voice let every word drop like a stone down a well. "The endowment named in this letter held, at the late Queen's death, the sum I have here in her hand. The household accounts of the domestic treasury, which the Queen Consort has managed alone these 11 years, show that same endowment today as very near empty, and the shortfall entered, in the household's own books and the household's own ink, against losses arising out of the late Queen Isolde's mismanagement. She raised her head and turned her terrible eyes upon Morwenna, and the whole court turned its face with her. The dead woman kept an exact account of what she left. The living one has spent it and written the blame on the grave. Both sets of books are in this hall. They can be laid side by side within the hour before the king's own auditors. Shall we? It was over then, though it took the hall a long moment to understand that it was over. Morwenna rose from her chair, still beautiful, still composed, reaching even in that ruin for the warm and grieving voice that had carried her all her life. "My lord, this is a monstrous confection, a servant and an old maid and a doting clerk all in I." She got no further. King Alaric was on his feet. I had never in my years at Harrowgate heard the king raise his voice, and he did not raise it now. What came out of him was worse than any shout. It was low, and it shook, and it was final. "You let me believe," he said, "that she was cold. For 11 years you let me believe it. You sat at my side at her memorials with tears upon your face, and you let me think my Isolde had turned from her own starving people, when she had sold the collar off her neck to feed them and worn glass to her grave so that I should never be shamed by it. And all the while you were bleeding dry the very trust she built for our grandchildren and laying the theft at a dead woman's feet." His voice cracked clean across, and he did not trouble to mend it. "Be silent. Do not speak to me in that voice. You will never use that voice on me again, as long as you live." The Queen Consort did not answer. She sank back into her chair with her hands folded in her lap and her lovely face gone quite still. And for the first time since I had known her by sight, she looked like exactly what she was. A woman at the bottom of a well she had dug for herself over 11 patient years, watching the light go out overhead. What followed was not the sort of thing songs are made of. It was slower and quieter than that, and it was, I have come to think, the more just for being so. The king did not order Morwenna dragged from the hall. A realm is not steadied by such spectacles, and Alaric, whatever his grief, was still a king. He set the matter into the only hands that could carry it without staining the crown further, his sisters and the laws. Princess Adela was named to oversee an accounting of the domestic treasury, root and branch, with the king's own auditors and 2 guardsmen of Dravens choosing standing over every ledger. It took the better part of a year. When it was done, the shape of it was exactly what a blind old clerk had drawn for me in a whitewashed cell. Queen Isolde's endowment, raised for the poor and for her grandchildren's protection, had been bled almost dry, coin by coin, into the Queen Consort's private accounts, into Lord Cassius's debts and his sister's dowry and the soft cushioning of a life, and the hole in the book stopped up year upon year with the same 3 convenient words: the late Queen's mismanagement. Morwenna kept her life and her title, for the king would not make his own second marriage a public ruin, and there were the young to think of, and mercy is a king's to give. But she kept little else. She was stripped of the household purse and every office of trust within the palace. The management of all endowments and charities passed to Adela and to a board of honest trustees, and Morwenna herself was removed to a distant dower house in the cold north of the realm, to live out her years quietly and far from any coffer she might reach. Her factor Rennick, who had picked the lock in the dark, was turned out of the household in disgrace and barred from every noble door. A gray man made grayer, gone from the palace as though he had never smoothed his way through it. Lord Cassius, who I think had known enough to be ashamed and not enough to have stopped it, was sent to serve at a far garrison where a young man might learn what his mother had never taught him. What the endowment could be made whole from the crown's own recovery, it was, and every coin of it, by the king's command, went where the dead queen had meant it to go. But the accounting and the punishments are not the part I carry. The part I carry began the morning the king rose in that same audience hall, some weeks after, and did the thing a king can do that no ledger can. He spoke, and made a truth official, and unmade a lie 11 years in the wearing. He proclaimed it through the whole realm, not softly, not to spare anyone, least of all himself. He told his people who the grey almoner had been. He told them of the collar sold and the glass worn in its place, of the grain that had gone by night to the fens and the moors under a name with no face, of the 200,000 souls fed out of one woman's private fortune while she let her own country believe her cold on purpose, so that her charity could never be turned into a war against her son. He named the parishes. He named the numbers. And he decreed that the late Queen Isolde would be known henceforth by a truer name than the one the court had hung on her, not the cold queen, not the miser queen, but Isolde the open-handed, and that her true story would be read once a year, in the fen churches and the moor churches and every church that had eaten her bread in the dearth, so that the realm would not forget her twice. I have seen strong men weep, being a guardsman, more often than most, but I never saw anything to match the crowd in the great forecourt the day that proclamation was cried. The old ones understood it first, the ones who had been grown in the dearth, who had prayed for a stranger over their bread and never had a face to give the prayer. I watched an ancient woman near the gate put both hands over her mouth and go down on her knees on the cobblestones, not in grief, but in a kind of shattered thanksgiving, saying a name at last to a debt she had carried her whole life. There were 1,000 like her across the realm that week. The grey almoner had a face now, and the face was the queen they had been taught to scorn. There is a smaller thing, and it is the one that undid me, so I will set it down last. They reset the paste collar. The court jewelers wished to melt the glass and make good the Eldermore collar in true stones from the crown's own store, and the king would not have it. He commanded that the paste be kept, the very string of colored glass Isolde had worn to her grave, and set in a case of honor in the hall through which the whole household passed each day, with the truth of it engraved on a plate beneath, that these were the false stones a queen had worn so that the true ones might be bred. He said a crown had jewels enough. He said this was the only one worth showing. And they did not forget the prince, though I think the prince would have asked them to. Rowan, the serious man who had carried his mother's ill name all his life like a stone in his shoe, came to the crypt the day after the proclamation, alone but for a single guardsman he had asked for by name, which is how I came to be there. He stood a long time at Isolde's tomb without speaking. When at last he did, it was not to me and not quite to her. I believed them, he said. My own mother and I believed what they said of her because it was easier than wondering why she had grown so strange and so shut away. She let me believe it. She let me be ashamed of her to keep me safe. He laid his hand flat on the cold stone. I would rather have known. I would rather have been in danger and known. Then he was quiet, and I gave him the only thing a guardsman has to give, which is to stand near a man in his grief and see nothing and say nothing, and be a wall between him and the world for as long as he needs one. The Princess Ilara planted a garden. Bettany, the little dry clerk who had kept his oath 11 years and then given it to the right hand at last, was brought up out of the almshouse and lodged in comfort in the palace for the rest of his days, and made much of, and asked 100 questions by 100 people who had never troubled to ask him one before. He bore it, I think, with more patience than they deserved, and he died within the year, in a warm bed, having lived to see it. He told me near the end that he could go easy now. She said an honest hand would open that door, he said, and I called her a dreamer in my heart. God forgive me. She was only patient. The patient are so often taken for the cold. As for me, I asked for nothing, and I want that understood, because the asking is where such stories go wrong. But the king would have it that I be thanked, and Adela would have it that I be given a post worth the keeping, and so I was made keeper of the queen's muniment. The very room I had guarded shut for 3 years I now keep open, dusted, and in order, its ledgers no longer a shame to be burned but a treasury to be shown. Children come through it now on the great feast days, the palace children, and once a year, the fen children brought up specially, and they are told whose accounts these are and what the numbers meant, and I tell them myself in plain words, and I always end it the same way, because it is the truest thing I know. I tell them that I stood outside a locked door for 3 years believing the worst of the woman behind it, because that was the only story I had ever been told. I tell them that a story everyone repeats is not the same thing as the truth, and that the two can be exact opposites, and that the only way to know which you are holding is to open the door and read what is actually inside. I tell them that the coldest name in the realm belonged to its warmest heart, and that I ate her bread as a starving child in the fens and grew up to be the honest hand she said would come, and that I do not think, any longer, that such things are chance. And then I go back to my post at the open door in the lower Queen's wing, where the light comes in now, and I stand my hours as I have always stood them, but not any more to keep anyone out. To make certain, for as long as there is breath in me, that no one ever seals this room or this woman's name away in the dark again.